These are the kinds of things that can really, really help propel you. What seem to be disadvantages, but are actually advantages if they're used correctly. We break down unfair advantages into 5 different categories. We call it the Miles framework. So M is for money. And so it's kind of a blessing in disguise to not immediately become super successful in your first go. Successful entrepreneurs had that kind of attitude, and that's what made them get in. It comes across in your sub-communications, it comes across in your voice tone, your language choice, the pauses. Be coachable, be trainable, have a good attitude, be willing to put in the work.
Today, I have the privilege of sitting down with Hasan Kubba. Hasan is an award-winning author, business coach, and keynote speaker. His book, The Unfair Advantage: How You Already Have What It Takes to Succeed, won the title of the Best Business Book of the Year in 2021. And it was also featured in Forbes, Fortune, BBC, and translated into multiple different languages. Hailing from a background in personal branding and technology, Hasan's life experience and his ability to translate that experience into tangible nuggets of wisdom for others has helped him coach and elevate entrepreneurs across the globe. In this episode, we delve into the core concepts of his book, as well as how to recognize and monetize your very own unfair advantage. Many people struggle to navigate and comprehend success, whether it's other people's or their own. We may struggle to understand the various components of success and come to terms with the influence of the factors that we can't control, like luck, wealth, status, nepotism, sex, race, and even physical appearance. With social media, we are bombarded with outliers and anomalies masquerading as the norm, which has led us to skew and misunderstand success as both a personal experience and as a universal concept. Is life really unfair? And if so, how do we leverage what we do have in order to get what we want? Keep listening to find out. Hi, Hasan. It's so great to be here with you. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start talking about your book. I absolutely loved reading your book. And I think there's so many takeaways, especially for people in their 20s who are about to graduate college or just graduated college and try to figure out what they want to do in life. But how would you explain the concept of an unfair advantage in your own words?
Yeah, so an unfair advantage is some kind of competitive upper hand. So it's like a head start in a race. It's essentially any kind of asset or circumstance or strength that you have that puts you above your competition and puts you in a favorable, like, let's say, business position or any kind of competitive position. Some of us have, if you're into self-development and kind of development in general, you'll kind of come across this idea of like double down on your strengths rather than focusing too much on your weaknesses. Now that in itself is a very powerful idea, I think, especially in terms of career or business. Like doubling down on your strengths is very important. But one thing that it doesn't include, and which is very unique to our book, is this idea of acknowledging and incorporating circumstances as well. So things that are external to you, but have huge impacts on you. So an unfair advantage could be an internal strength, but it can also be an external strength as well, like some kind of circumstance that you're in, where you are, where you were born, what kind of parents, friends, family you have, what kind of education you had, etc., etc.
So what are some of the most surprising or least obvious unfair advantages that people tend to have or that you've noticed?
Most surprising. Well, let's start by saying the obvious things, where it's like an obvious one is like being born to a rich family, money as an unfair advantage. That's a very common one. It's probably one that people first think of. And yeah, it is an unfair advantage. Let's not like deny it. Let's not play it down. It plays a huge role. The kind of, or even going even bigger picture of like what kind of passport you have, what citizenship you have, where in the world you're based. That those play huge roles, and those are kind of the more obvious ones if you can kind of zoom out and just take a moment to say, hey, where am I in life and why am I here? But then the more surprising ones, they're essentially like what seem to be disadvantages but are actually advantages if they're used correctly. So often they could be based on something like an insight that you might have. We break down unfair advantages into 5 different categories. We call it the Miles framework. So M is for money, I is for intelligence and insight. L is for location and luck, right place, right time. E is for education and expertise. And S is for status. Status is how you're perceived, so that's your external status, is like how do people see you and perceive you. That plays a huge role and probably the most powerful unfair advantage. Now, the ones which often seem like a disadvantage in status can be an advantage in another way. So let's say you're from some kind of ethnic minority, or let's say you're a woman in business, which proportionally to this day can have a lot of barriers to it, or can have a lot of like kind of maybe sort of invisible sort of disadvantages, let's say. But then you'll have advantages of having the insight of a woman. Or for example, let's say nowadays people are always trying to increase the quotas of like the female speakers at events or conferences or on a panel. So then it can be an advantage in that sense. So everything is, give and take, come and go, kind of double-edged swords, an advantage and a disadvantage. One classic example is Sarah Blakely. She's really famous self-made billionaire, American self-made billionaire. She founded Spanx, which is all about this shapewear company. And essentially it's for women to wear under their clothes to have the right silhouette. And to be honest, especially in the late 90s, a man probably wouldn't have had that insight, so that unfair advantage of insight comes from a woman, and it's from her status as a woman. Now, there are so many different examples of this sort of thing, and those are probably the ones which are most surprising. It's something that seems like a disadvantage that ends up being an advantage. I'll give you another quick one. Being born to a kind of a poorer family, socioeconomic status, you would have insights into what the average person with a limited budget thinks and feels and prioritizes. And therefore, you might come up with mass market products and services where you can think about what the average person really cares about, rather than if you were born into a wealthy family and you'd have no connection or insight into those kinds of concerns. So yeah, it often involves insights, with intelligence and insight, and it often involves like what seems like a disadvantage of status. Those are the ones that are most common, like surprising things. In terms of what people would forget, and I just wanted to mention this because we all have to be so much to be grateful for, is health. It's not in the Mars framework, but it's so important. Like if you have health, we do mention it in the book quite a few times. If you have good health and you don't have to be a caregiver to somebody in your family or something, that's a huge unfair advantage. But most of us don't even recognize or realize how lucky we are. And even if it feels like we've got something bad, like in some ways that can be a positive, having health issues or something. Many hyper successful people had tons of health issues. So it's just a funny thing to think about and be grateful for.
Totally. Like you said in the book, I like the phrase that you said. He said, luck isn't always lucky. It just got me thinking so many things, like you said, health, not having enough money, then you learn to be resourceful and become more relatable. I guess in a way, even being young. And that kind of leads me to the next question. Because I think people in their early 20s, like myself, we're often dismissed by other people or even by our own inner critics as being too naive and too inexperienced or too ambitious. And that can be true in a lot of cases because there's so much for us to learn as early professionals and as people. But what do you think are some unfair advantages that come with being perhaps less experienced and more young and in your 20s? And how can we start to see that as an asset rather than a liability?
Age is a huge one. It goes both ways. Like it can be an advantage to be young because people will assume you're more hip with the trends. You understand the younger people. You understand what's coming next. You understand the future direction. You also have energy. You have a lot more energy because you're young. You have a lot more flexibility because you're young. You have far fewer responsibilities because you're young. Are more likely to be naive. Naivety is a very interesting double-edged kind of advantage disadvantage because, well, obviously it seems like a disadvantage at first because why would naivety be a good thing? But it's good because that naivety can sometimes help you to just go, yeah, let's just give this a shot. Can't be that hard. And that's a blessing in many cases. Many successful entrepreneurs had that kind of attitude, and that's what made them get in. And in some ways they would say things like, if I knew how hard it would be, I don't know if I would go into it. If I had full knowledge of all the difficulties I would face, maybe I wouldn't have, but that would be a shame because I'm glad I did, that kind of thing. So those are the biggest advantages. Other advantages are people are just more likely to try and help you when you're young. They're more likely to try and have a mentorship kind of relationship with you, as opposed to just be like, you're my age or you're older, and therefore, sure, I'll share some insights with you, but I'm less likely to just give you the time of day or overlook a lack of experience, etc. There's a lot of benefits to being young, and especially in this day and age with all the tech stuff, you're just assumed to understand it more. So it's definitely, there's a lot of ageism against older people in, for example, the tech industry and in many industries these days.
That was a very important insight for me to hear. I'm 21 and I'm about to graduate college, and it's an interesting experience going through the whole job application, job search process, but this is a good insight for me to have in the back of my mind. And you talked a little bit about mentorship and finding a mentor. Can you talk more about that? How can young people or anyone listening find the right mentor for them?
Yeah, mentorship is huge. I feel like my journey's been helped by having quite a few really successful, really insightful mentors. And I never kind of seeked out. I can't remember. I don't think I was very deliberate about trying to seek out mentors, but I was very open to getting advice. I was very open to getting guidance. I was very open to modeling success. And I think that's what helped me get there. And the other thing is that I give specific advice about how to do it. First of all, identify what kind of person you want to learn from or want to be mentored by. What kind of successes are you trying to model? What kind of experiences have they had that you can kind of relate to and kind of want to go in that direction? What journey have they been on? Secondly, you don't necessarily pick the top number one person in the industry. Rather, you pick somebody who's like, let's say, a few years ahead of you, not somebody who's 20, 30, 40 years ahead, because it's different. Then there's just such a wide gap. It can be quite hard for them to relate to your beginner struggles. Secondly, one thing I say is don't be weird about it. In other words, don't approach and be like, can you be my mentor? Because I think it's almost like asking, it's like making a marriage proposal on the first date kind of thing. It's kind of like it's too much. It's like you should start by just asking a question, asking a very, so one thing. So I get a lot of people contacting me and I get emails from readers, I get DMs, etc. One of the biggest issues is to get huge paragraphs, like super long emails or super long messages, like huge paragraphs of like life story and background, and then not even a real question at the end, just sort of like help. It's like it's hard to help when it's like that. Whereas the opposite of that, super short, super succinct, super to the point, respectful of time, etc. Those kind of specific questions I can actually answer. I love to answer those. And then, so that's step number one, is ask really specific kind of advice or questions. And then when you're given the answer, implement, do it, and then feedback. So the biggest insight is actually do it and then feed back to the person who gave you the advice what happened. 99% of people who will ask me a question or ask me a piece of advice, I'll never hear from again. Or if I do, they'll just ask me the same question again. It's like going around in circles. Rather, if you come back, and the few people who have done this, I always feel sort of invested in helping them, because now it becomes a fun game. It becomes like, oh, cool, I tried what you suggested, and 3 people said no, but 2 said they might think about it, and 1 actually wanted to have a meeting. For example, if they're trying to, I don't know, do sales or something, business development. And it's like, oh, that's fun. Then I'll say, okay, try this next, and try that next. And then it becomes, and that's kind of how it happens. The other thing I think I mentioned is about how you want to try and add value. You have value to add. You have skills, you have time, you have inclination, you have passion. These are things that you can offer in return for advice, guidance, sort of unofficial internship kind of positions. These are the kinds of things that can really, really help propel you. So if you're looking to get sort of the biggest shortcut, it's kind of like the social side of self-development. So surround yourself with people who you want to be more like, get mentors, get coaches, get accountability buddies. It's all about the biggest shortcuts are all social. It's all about the people you surround yourself with or get influenced by.
I like the quote that you're the lump sum of the 5 people that you surround yourself with most. Yeah. I think that speaks to that. And absolutely. In terms of providing value or demonstrating how you can give back to somebody that you're reaching out to as a mentor, it can be tricky because the first step of that is to believe that you have value to share in the first place. And it's hard, especially if you're young or you're inexperienced and you're potentially talking to somebody who's like 5 years or more ahead of you in the game. So what are some ways to kind of work around that imposter syndrome? And you talked a lot about inner status in your book and how that
Yes.
corresponds to outer status. So can you delve more into that?
Yeah, the whole imposter syndrome thing is just so common. You think that you're the only one experiencing it. Everyone kind of feels that way to a certain extent, or at least at the beginning of their journeys, they did to some extent. It's really important to understand that how you view yourself impacts how you come across to others. And, what's in your subconscious will, over time, not immediately, it's not magical, it's not that they're reading your mind, but it comes across. It comes across in your sub communications. It comes across in your voice tone, your language choice, the pauses, all these different things, your body language. So many different things give away how you feel. And in other words, confidence is powerful. And you don't need to be confident in an arrogant sense. It just means like you have to understand that you have value to give. Look, I've hired so many people. What I look for when hiring is attitude. Somebody who's willing to put in work, somebody who's enthusiastic, positive, doesn't give up when they reach the first hurdle and the first obstacle, and just figures things out, resourceful. That is really key. And what I'm not looking for is necessarily skills, because skills can be learned. I'm looking for somebody with a growth mindset who's coachable. That's the key, is to be coachable. So, let's say, just to use some little examples, let's say you need to just get good at using Canva. That's so learnable. And if you need to watch a YouTube tutorial, you can. So we're living in an era where it's not like, I don't know, 15 years ago, where learning to code was super important for those types of tasks, or learning to design. Like it used to be like it's just Photoshop really. And it will take like weeks and months to learn, just what the buttons do on Photoshop. And it's similar to like doing changes to a website. Is to be extremely complicated. But nowadays, everything is quite straightforward. It's as complicated as it is to use your Instagram account or to use TikTok. It's just about going through menus and stuff. Like increasingly, here's how you prompt GPT, chat GPT or something. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is this is all very learnable. You have a ton of value to give as a young person. You just need to be coachable, be trainable, have a good attitude, be willing to put in the work.
I really liked what you said about the growth mindset. And I think it's something that comes up a lot in a lot of conversations. I'm taking a psychology class right now, and it's basically everything we talk about. But in your book, you said that there are some limits to the growth mindset.
Mm.
How do we strike a balance between self-awareness and self-belief?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's a calibration and a self-awareness thing. You have to calibrate that. But the reality is, you can achieve a lot more than you think you can, but not to infinity. Not I can do anything I set my mind to. Not really. I mean, sometimes you kind of take on that mindset because it's like good. It's like I talk about in the book as tools in your mental toolbox. So sometimes you have to be like, yeah, bring on the challenge. I could do it. I'll figure it out. No worries. I'll get on that. Let's do this. And that's an extremely useful mindset to have. Extremely useful. And you should use that mindset a lot. It's a very useful attitude. However, to have that as the only tool in your toolbox is very limiting, because you're bound to be disappointed. You're lacking in self-awareness. You're lacking awareness of your strengths and weaknesses because you're denying any weaknesses in a way. So that's the problem with it. What's more powerful is to say, I could probably figure that out, no problem. But is that the ideal way for me to go about this? Or should I look for somebody who already has that as a skill? It kind of, one of the applications of having what we call a reality growth mindset, which is this idea of it's rooted in some reality. You're not going to be able to get a reply from, I don't know why Mark Cuban is coming to mind, but here you go. You won't necessarily get a reply from Mark Cuban, but it's certainly possible. But an email shot out to him isn't going to necessarily get you investment, right? It probably isn't, but it's worth a shot. And it's kind of like just thinking about, wait, what's a better way to go about this? How can I be more resourceful? How can I be creative? What can I do to get attention? And I think that's the key to kind of what the limitations are of a growth mindset. It's to kind of be aware of your strengths and weaknesses, understand that everybody has weaknesses, understand that you're not going to be good at everything, understand that our brains work in different ways. Neurodiversity is a real thing. It's more powerful to think of things in terms of teams, in terms of who you'll partner with, in terms of what comes easily to you, in terms of partnering with people who enjoy that certain thing that you don't enjoy, but needs to be done.
So I wanted to ask you, in your book, you talk about making your own luck. And I thought that was such a cool concept, because Like the idea of luck is just that it's out of your control and there's nothing you can do about it. And so when you talk about manufacturing your own luck or creating your own luck, that really sparked my interest. Can you talk about how we can do that?
Yeah, luck is an interesting one because if we just use a simple analogy, a simple example, if you want to roll a double six in any kind of board game or something with two dice, you can't roll and then be like, wait, let me do that again until you get a six. But guess what? In life, you can. That's the key. You could just keep rolling. No one's really keeping count. No one's really keeping score. There are some situations in life where you can't, but most situations in life you can. You can just keep trying. No one's keeping count. Nobody really is worried about it. Everybody's all caught up in their own life and their own struggles and day-to-days and their own insecurities. And we feel vulnerable by rolling that dice, trying something, putting ourselves out there, etc. But the reality is if you don't try, you don't get. So whether it's, creating content, creating a podcast, whether it's launching a business, creating a product, coding something, reaching out to get a client, whatever it might be, you never know what might go viral or what might be successful or what might make thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you just got to try a lot of things. So what we say is increase your surface area to luck. That's how you can increase your chances of getting lucky. You're not going to get lucky sitting at home doing nothing, watching Netflix. No one's going to really knock on your door. You're not going to, you know, as they say for I think is the old slogan of the British National Lottery, I think is something like you've got to be in it to win it. And I don't advocate lottery because that's the stupidest way to try and get rich, is some sort of gambling or some sort of hope against terrible odds. Instead, your odds are much better of just publishing stuff or reaching out to people that you're interested in, I don't know, working with or interviewing or whatever it might be, So that's what it means to increase your surface area, to like try more things. You also get more insights into yourself of what you enjoy doing, where you have unfair advantages, etc.
It's funny you said the lottery thing because I read somewhere recently that people who win lotteries are more likely to go broke shortly after. I think it's like in 5 years after than they were even before they won the lottery. So if anything, it's kind of a doomsday situation. Then
It really is.
yeah.
What was that quote that you said back to me again? It was something like, luck doesn't always mean lucky.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so easy come, easy go, right?
Mm.
It's like I don't know, like a musician or any kind of creative thing. Let's say a musician who
Yeah.
has on their first single has like it go super successful and stratospheric and like, but then what? They're a one-hit wonder, and then everything else they do afterwards doesn't succeed. They never built the skills, they never built the discipline, they never put in the time, and they got lucky. And now they're just defined by that one hit that they made. And it's kind of a sad life. And it's kind of worse than the previous life because it's like, now what? I peaked, like I can't replicate the success of my first single, my first album, or some YouTube video I made back in the day. Hopefully in time you build the discipline, you build the skill set, and so it's kind of a blessing in disguise to not immediately become super successful in your first go, and instead to have to struggle a bit so you can actually have the right mindset and be grateful for it when you've got it, so you don't take it for granted and think, yeah, I could probably do this again, which you probably can't. A lot of startup founders have found that they've been successful with their first startups and then completely failed on a second. That happens a lot, and that's because luck is involved. There is a lot of luck involved. And so just because they succeeded the first time doesn't mean they'll succeed the second. And so it's very disheartening for them. I've spoken to people who've gone through stuff like this. It's like sometimes they're less happy than people who never succeeded in the first place. Oftentimes they're less happy because they'll just compare themselves to people even more successful. And they'll also think, but why can't I do it again? What's the matter with me? Or like, they'll have all this kind of negative self-talk. Whereas somebody just having a nice middle class income is just happy, can be happier. So yeah, that's definitely why it's crucial to kind of not look for those easy wins, because yeah, come back to easy come, easy go. You don't develop the underlying mentality for success, the skills, the discipline, the perseverance, the grit, the determination. I've never gambled in my life, and I don't think I never will really. But I think it's the same. I can imagine if I did, I don't know, go to Vegas and gamble and then win, it'll be worse than if I didn't, because then I'd be hooked. No
Mm.
matter how much logically I think this, I just got lucky, I'll still be like, yeah, but maybe again, and then I would, it's this whole thing where you might win once, but over multiple tries, the house always wins. And so if you average out the probabilities, you're not going to keep getting lucky. So lifetime, you're going to lose. So so it's awful. It's absolutely awful to have that mindset. It's just toxic mindset to think, let me win the lottery or let me get lucky in some other way. It's awful.
Mm. It's so interesting. I never really thought about failing after you've already succeeded. I think, especially when you're young, you kind of think, oh, okay, one day I'll have this big break or I'll be on this trajectory and then just kind of keep going upwards. And obviously, that's part of the naivety that comes with being young. And I'm learning now, and like through your book and also through like other recent incidences, that that's just not how it works.
Yep.
You can fail at any point, you can succeed at any point. It's the long road.
In some ways, look, I coach a lot of YouTubers, a lot of big YouTubers now. So a lot of what I do is coach YouTubers, aspiring authors, content creators in general, people trying to build their personal brands, people wanting to do online courses, etc. So that kind of category. So a lot of YouTubers, and there's nothing like sadder than looking at a YouTube channel with like millions of subscribers, but then you look at their recent, you know, uh, 20, 30 videos, and they're not even breaking, you know, 50K or 10K. Whereas if you look at them, if you filter by most popular, you'll see millions of views, but then they're all like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And there's something so sad about that. And which is why there's this whole thing of like, as a creator, and especially people this happens more, I would say this happens more in the entertainment genre, because entertainment is a bit more luck based. It's a little bit more like, what's the flavor? What's the trend of the season? What's funny now? It's rare for a creator to continue to be funny or continue to be entertaining. But it also happens to educational YouTubers as well. It's not just the entertainment ones. But my point is, there's something like very sad about that, about peaking, about like, oh, I've peaked. It's just I'll never get the views I used to get. It's just something about that that's just awful. Which is why you need to kind of be mentally ready for the fact that it's going to be some kind of up and then down, maybe, on such platforms. Number one. And number two, to diversify away, to create an email list, to create different products, different forms of content, to create newsletters, to create online courses, to reduce that fragility in like relying on one platform for success, or one product. I say you do a business, I don't know if you remember fidget spinners and how big those used to be. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how many years ago, 5 years ago now,
Yeah.
more. Like, imagine if you were just somebody who was selling fidget spinners and that was your whole thing. It's like, yeah, that's a trend, like you can't build a whole brand around that. Things like that. But it's not just fidget spinners. Like, a lot of things are just trends. And if you don't diversify away or figure out ways to evolve, or what the next trend is, or what the next thing is, or something that's a bit more evergreen, there's something quite sad about it. And
Mm.
it's something to, yeah, be careful what you wish for in terms of like instant success or instant virality, because that can be a really tough road. You'd rather have a slow, steady up rather than a crazy up and then a down. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. It's kind of like the micro, macro trends that you were talking about in your book. That was interesting too.
Yeah, that's exactly
Yeah,
it.
distinguishing between
Absolutely.
that.
Mm.
So I guess my last question for you is, you talk about like the spectrum of like meritocracy to fatalism when it comes to success, and
Mm.
the idea that success is not contingent upon just hard work or just fate and luck, but like a mixture of both of them. So can you talk about the danger of a single story of success? And if we either subscribe blindly to the idea that, okay, it's all about meritocracy, yeah, anything is possible if you work hard, like the American dream, or blindly follow fatalism and feel like, okay, you're either lucky or you're not. Can you talk a little bit about the dangers of that single story of success?
Yes. So on balance, look, so one of the things is in the part one of the book, what you're referring to is in part one, it's about, where does success come from? Is it hard work? Just to simplify the two different philosophies, this is oversimplification, but some people believe it's all hard work. And people who become successful or already were kind of born wealthy, etc. Essentially, people who are kind of doing better in life on kind of surface level financial terms, let's say, they'll tend, one defense mechanism, ego defense mechanism, is to say, I deserve this. I worked hard for this. And people who aren't doing so well, probably because they're lazy, probably because they deserve that. And there's this idea of judgment, an idea of kind of having moral judgment based on people's levels in life is very pernicious and dangerous. Now, so let me clarify. One is the belief in pure meritocracy, which is what I was just describing. If you succeeded, it's because you merited it. If you're not successful, so that sounds good, right? But then the flip side is a bit sad, because if you're not successful, then you didn't deserve it. So it's kind of an awful belief if you take it at face value and you believe in it fully. The other side is just to believe everything's random and luck and fate, which is ridiculous, because it's not. Let me put it this way, it's not. There is a lot of luck, there is a lot of fate, there is a lot of things outside our control, but there is also a lot of agency that we have. There is a lot of free will that we have. We can have an impact on our own lives, but it's limited. It goes back to the reality growth mindset. So the answer is in the middle. What we quote in the book is is philosopher Alain de Botton. Alain de Botton said that there's something great about America, which is this idea of the land of opportunity, the land of supposedly the classless society. Anybody can be anything. It's much less rigid in its hierarchies than the old world. The old world is everyone else, pretty much. It's like the UK, Europe in general, India, the Middle East, everywhere, because older societies have more of a hierarchy. So that's great, but there's a problem. The problem is that, before, let's say, go back a few hundred years, in England, you might look at a poor person and be like, and they were actually called unfortunates, which in the language itself is implying that they're unlucky. And in modern America, they might instead be referred to as, very unkindly, as losers. Now, look, there's some truth to some of this. This isn't black or white. There are winners and losers. There are people who work harder than others. There are people who are lazy, who want to take drugs, who want to just have fun, who just want to watch TV, who just want to veg out. This is true. But it's also true that where you're born matters, who you're born to matters, what kind of education you had matters, who you're surrounded by matters. Some of that just isn't under your control. Even your nutrition, there's so many things that we can't even measure, all the different things that affect us. Look, if you're going to have to choose one, it's probably better to have the mindset that you take responsibility for your life outcomes. You have to pull your socks up. You have to work hard. That's probably a better mindset to have if I had to choose one or the other. But if you take it to an extreme, that's terrible, because again, you'll be judgmental. You can probably become extreme right wing, because that's kind of left and right wing, isn't it? You become like an extreme right wing. You won't believe in social safety nets. You won't believe in welfare. You won't believe in helping people, because you'll just say tough luck. You deserve that position. You probably didn't work hard enough. So that's the situation. It's very important to kind of have a balance. You can think that it goes back to, again, the reality growth mindset. I can achieve anything, but also it's not all because of me. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
That's a great note to end on. Hassan, thank you so much for being on this podcast, on my YouTube channel. It was great to talk to you, and I really enjoyed reading your book, as I said before. And I can't wait for everyone to tune into this episode, into this video, and dig deeper into the context of your book.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.